Good afternoon, everybody. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Chad Foust. I'm the Technology Training Coordinator for CIS. And today we're going to talk about travel expenses, spend authorizations, expense reports, all that good stuff. So what we'll start with, let me mention just first of all that if you did attend any of our other trainings, hopefully you've already found our Workday info site, which is at workdayinfo.vassar.edu. We have a bunch of training materials there. It's the same ones that you have in your binders in front of you. And we have a bunch of videos that we're posting there too. So we already have videos for procurement A and B, and are right now recording the video for the travel parts of Workday. So just keep that in mind. That is a resource for you. That's kind of your go-to place to find out more information about Workday. So today we're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to talk about creating a spend authorization. Now this is a new option that we have in Workday, and not every department is necessarily going to use it. It's going to depend on your department and their workflows and policies. But what a spend authorization is a way to inform your cost center manager. That's a new term in Workday. Usually it's going to be your supervisor. You're informing them, I'm going to be traveling and this is the amount of money I estimate that I might be spending. So it's a way to plan spending in a way for people to know ahead of time what travel might cost. So it's going to be basically an estimate of what you think your expenses are going to be, and then when you're finished traveling, you can actually turn that spend authorization into an expense report and report what you actually spent. And it'll make the process a little more streamlined. So to create a spend authorization, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the upper left-hand corner of Workday and click on the search box, and I'm just going to type create spend authorization. So you can see that task just shows up as a search result. So I'll click on that. And basically, again, this is just an estimate of what I think I'm going to spend. So the first few things up at the top are things like what company, the start and end date. You would generally put in your travel dates. So if, for example, let's do an example. Let's just say we're doing an overnight trip to a conference. I'll go ahead and pick a start date sometime next week, and I'll do our end date just the day after that. Let's just say we're traveling somewhere overnight for a quick conference. I have to put a description in. So I'll go ahead and just type in a description. Business purpose is required. That is a required field that I need to add. So you can see if I click on that in that field, I have a number of different options of types of purposes that I can choose from. I'll just pick conference in this case. And this number here, the spend authorization total, will just automatically increase as I add line items down below. So we'll do that in just a moment. Over here I can choose if I am getting reimbursed. Generally this is going to be in the case of incidental items. If you are traveling using a C card, those transactions automatically get added to Workday, and you can add those to your expense report. I'll show you that later as we're creating the expense report. But if you are getting reimbursed, you can choose how you'd like that reimbursement, either as a check or direct deposit. And then there's a justification field that you can add any justification to. Again, this is going to kind of depend on the policies and procedures of your particular department or group, but you can add a justification in there as well for this particular travel. So down below, I'm going to go ahead and start adding spend authorization lines. So I'll just add different types of expenses here. And again, I'm just estimating. I'm going to give it my best guess. Now there might be some things I actually do know the exact expense of, so I'll just add all the ones that I know, and otherwise I might just estimate. So I'll go ahead and just click add. Let's say we know exactly what our conference is going to cost. So we just want to put in the registration fee, for example. So you can see when I click this expense item field, it gives me what we call spend categories. Again, this is a new terminology in Workday. A spend category is just a type of expense or a type of spending. So we have a lot of categories that are already in here. So you can click on this list here, and you can see there's a huge list of different types of expenses. But I find it a lot easier just to type the sort of thing I'm looking for and hit return, and that'll give me a number of different matching items for what I put in. So let's say this is a registration fee, so I'm just going to type registration. I'll hit return, and there an option is for conference, training, or meeting registration fees, so I'll go ahead and choose that. My quantity is 1 for this particular item, and then I'll just put in whatever the cost is of that registration fee. So say it's $100 for that registration fee. I can add a memo if I want to. In this case, you're basically creating an estimate, so the memo might not be as important, but if there's any additional info you want to put in about this expense, you can add that in the memo field. And down here you'll see these are some of the new types of fields that you can choose in Workday. So cost center is actually going to be what is currently called an org in banner. So in this case, it's filled in my current banner org number, which is 20525, but in Workday, all of our cost centers, all of our orgs are going to have a CC in front of them. So right now in the training version, we have both the banner version and the Workday version of these. So for example, if I type in user, I can see there are 2 instances of user services in here. The 20525 is the banner version of that, but in Workday, well, now that we've launched, you'll see CC 8006 for user services, and the old banner numbers are not in the live system. This is, again, our training instance. So you'll see these both in the training instance, but not in the live version of Workday going forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose our new cost center right here. And you'll see me just do this throughout this training. I'm just going to always change that to the new cost center because then it'll be routed to the right approver. You're not going to probably have to do this. Now, if you do work with a number of different orgs or different groups, you might have to manually change this depending on the expense. If you are doing an expense for a different department or something like that. But it should default to the org or the group that you are in. That's going to be your cost center. So that conference registration fee has been added. So if I want to just add a few more things, I can just go ahead and hit add. Let's just say I'm going to just kind of give a rough guess of what my hotel might cost and maybe what my travel will cost. So I'm just going to go ahead and search for hotel. I hit return. You can see lodging actually comes up. That's the term in Workday for a hotel stay or any kind of lodging. So I'll just choose that. And right now, I'm just going to give a rough estimate. I'll just say $200. Okay, and it did default to the new CC, so that's good, the new cost center. And I can just keep adding expense items at this point. Let's just say I want to put in, I want to do airfare. Choose that. Just estimate $300. Now you'll see, depending on the type of item I choose, the expense item, there are different additional item details fields that show up. These are not required, but it's a nice additional amount of information that gets added to your spend authorization and ultimately your expense report that gives anybody who might be doing an audit or any kind of, or looking into an expense report, it gives them more detail about, well, wait, why was this charged? What was this particular expense? These are optional, but it's probably a good idea to fill them out if they are provided. So in this case, let's say I know my destination and my origin airport, so I'll just, let's just say we're flying out of Stewart, for example. You can see it has all these different cities in the US. It has airports in there too. I could just put in the airport code if I knew what that was. So we'll do Stewart. Let's say we're flying to Chicago. Say we're flying to Midway. So we'll put that in. And then I'm going to just add one more expense item here. I'm just going to add meals. And I'll just estimate that I'm going to spend about $100. All right, so I've got my spend authorization here. Up at the top, I can see my total amount that I'm estimating for this travel. And this all looks good to me. Now I can, if I do have any kind of documentation, any kind of photograph, email receipt, anything like that, I can add it as an attachment at this point to simplify my life later on when I'm doing my expense report, but at this point the attachments are not required. So I'll go ahead and hit submit here. And you can see this was submitted and it shows me what the next step is for this process. So I submitted it and now it goes to my cost center manager or my supervisor for approval. So it's going to John for him to approve the spend authorization. I can click on details and process right here. That'll expand, it'll show me the details of my spend authorization, and I can click on this process tab, and that will show me all the steps that are involved in this particular approval process, or this workflow. Any questions so far about creating a spend authorization? Yeah.
Is it routing to manager or cost center?
The question is it routing to manager or cost center manager? It goes to your cost center manager.
So if somebody chooses a cost center or a budget line that's doesn't fall underneath their direct manager, it go to their cost center.
Yes, so if someone chooses a cost center that they are not a part of, it will still go to that cost center manager for approval.
Thank you.
Yep.
Chad?
Yes.
So did all the org numbers change?
Yes. All of the org numbers changed
You-
for Workday Finance.
In the previous session, given out the list of new org numbers, or how do we?
It's coming to you via email from me.
Great.
And does the finance department site or the finance site have the new numbers on it, just for reference?
It doesn't have the cost center, the account numbers, but it has other information that you'll potentially make use of.
Okay. So there will be new cost center numbers coming to you via an email message. Okay. Any more questions about the spend authorization? Okay. So what I'll show you next is one of the ways you can use the Workday mobile app when you're traveling to record expenses, which will then make filing your expense report when you return from travel a little bit easier, because you'll be able to just record your expenses on the go and then add them into your expense report later on. So let's say we're going on our trip to Chicago. We've got our corporate card. We're going to make a bunch of purchases on our corporate card, but maybe we have a few incidental or unexpected things that show up and we just pay cash, or we pay with our own credit card or something like that, and we want to just record those. I'll show you how the Workday mobile app lets you do that. All right, so on my iPhone, I do have the Workday mobile app installed. And you'll see over on the right-hand side, there is an expenses option here. So I'll go ahead and just tap that. And in the expenses worklet, I have a few different options. I can add a new expense, and I can also create an expense report or even work on the expense report I've already created. So if, for example, you're on a long trip and you want to file that expense report remotely, you can do that if you'd like to by creating a new expense report or editing one that you've created. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and just add a new expense. I'm going to do that. I'm just going to file that expense report when I get back from my conference. So I'll tap New Expense. You can see right at the top of the app, I have a little photo button. So I'll go ahead and tap that. And now I can choose. I can take a photo right now. I can choose a photo that I've already taken, and that is useful if you do not have an internet connection when you want to record that expense, because to actually file this expense with Workday, you do have to have an internet connection. The Workday app won't work without an internet connection. But getting around that, you can just use the photo application on your phone and just take a photo, and then when you do have an internet connection, just add that expense and just choose a photo from your phone's image gallery, if that makes sense. In this case, I'm just going to take a photo. So let's say I have a receipt here. Maybe I took the train from the airport. I didn't think about, I got to the airport and I forgot that I had to get a taxi or something. But they have a light rail or something like that in Chicago, so I'm just going to go ahead and take a photo of my receipt. I just paid cash for this, for example. And then again, I do have to choose expense item. So I'm gonna search for train. You can see there we go, taxi, train, and ground travel. So I'll choose that. I'll put in the amount of that train ticket. I can add a memo again if I want to. So I'll just say paid for train ticket with cash. That all looks good to me, so I'll say done, and that's saved, and now that's an expense in Workday that I can draw from when I'm creating my expense report. So I can do this as many times as I want to when I'm traveling. The cool thing is right now it's not attached to any particular expense report, so even if I do a few different trips, I can just record all these expenses and add them onto the report later on. Any questions about that, using the mobile app to record expenses?
Also, there are instructions for how to install the app onto your phone that would be in your training materials. And we obviously encourage people to install the app. It's just a nice tool that could serve you in a variety of cases, whether you're traveling or if you're somebody who needs to even approve an expense, or if you're somebody who approves timesheets, you can use the app to do functions like that as well.
All right, so I finished traveling. I'm back in my office, and now I'm ready to actually create my expense report. This is how much I spent on travel. So I'm going to go ahead again, go to the search box in Workday. I'm going to type create expense report, and it takes me to this task. So over on the right, I have a bunch of instructions. There are tips. There are links to the various travel policies, corporate card policies. There's information about mileage reimbursements. We can talk about that in a little more detail. Lodging expenses do need to be itemized. That's the only kind of expense that needs to be itemized on an expense report, and I'll show you that. And then there's just a few other little pieces of information there. So up here, for my creation options for this expense report, I can create a new expense report from scratch. Maybe my department doesn't use the spend authorization, so I'm just creating this from scratch. I can choose to copy a previous expense report. If, for example, there's a certain trip that I make frequently or annually or something like that, I could choose to copy a previous report. I could change any amounts that might have changed, but maybe all my expenses are pretty similar. It's the same type of expenses, things like that. I can copy a previous one. But we're going to choose this last option, which is to create a new expense report from a spend authorization, since we did create that expend authorization. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that option. I'll click in the field, and it should show me these are all my spend authorizations that have been approved. So I'll choose this one for the IT conference. Scroll down a little bit. This is the expense report date, so this is the date that I'm actually filing the report. I'm going to go ahead and just change my cost center again to the new one. Down here, this is something you'll see in Workday before, and if you haven't been to the procurement sessions, we'll talk about this in those sessions too. But basically down here in the additional work tags field, this lets you choose from different programs, grants, events, things like that, if there are certain budgets to use for those types of expenses. So you can do this as an overall setting for this entire expense report, or you can do it for each individual expense. You can change the tags for that. So I'll click in additional work tags just so you can see what it looks like. And I can see I have gifts, grants, events, programs, projects, things like that. So for example, if I just go into grant right here, you see there's a huge list of all these different types of grants. If I go ahead and just click on one of these, you'll see as soon as I do that, it changes my cost center and fund to line up with this particular grant that I'm spending from. So that gives you a lot of options for choosing your different types of expenditures, where that money is coming from.
I'd just say bear in mind, of course, that when you choose a grant that you would be charging an expense against, obviously it will have to be approved by the person who oversees the grant. So it's not just kind of a carte blanche to spend money on whatever available source of money is out there. There's always going to be somebody, in the case of a grant, it would be the principal investigator. In the case of a kind of a standard department or office expense, it would be the cost center manager, who we would have considered to be the budget manager. So the idea is that even if you err, if you happen to choose the wrong source of money that you say you're charging your travel expense against, it'll still go to somebody for approval. And they will notice, oh, you chose the wrong source. They'll send it back to you and say you need to correct this and be charging a different source for the expense.
So as I scroll down here, I now see different expenses that I've already added to Workday. So I do see mobile expenses here. So here's my expense I just filed with my iPhone. If I had more expenses, they would all show up here. And I can just click this checkbox to include this expense in my expense report. Now, if you did use a corporate card for your expenses, you would also see an item over here, and Candace will show you that later with Candace. There will be another heading here that says corporate card expenses. You could click on that. Any expenses you've actually done on your corporate card that have posted are added to Workday, and you can now add those expenses right into your expense report as well. So not just mobile, you can also just add your C-card expenses as well. So I'll go ahead and select this mobile expense that I added. We'll say OK. And now I get into the nitty-gritty of actually adding my expenses and putting in what I actually spent for all this stuff. So this stuff probably doesn't need to change. This is just pulled in from the spend authorization, so I probably don't need to change any of that. Here's my first expense. That was just pulled in again from the mobile app. And I'm going to just go ahead and start adding other expenses. So we'll just put in lodging here. Now I have an example receipt here that I'm going to work off of. So for this particular expense, my total stay was $232.32. Now, as we mentioned before, for lodging, you do need to itemize that. So I'm going to put in the total amount first for that hotel stay. Then I'm going to click on Itemize up here in the upper right. And you'll see by default, the first item that's in here is the room rate. So for this is just a one-night stay. So I'll just put in the rate for the room. I'm not going to include tax here because we're going to do that in just a moment. So I'll just put I'll put the room rate in there. I'll click Add down here. And then again, I can choose an expense item. And so I'm going to put tax in there. So I'll search for tax. You'll see there's only one type of tax in Workday for lodging, so it'll be room tax. Now, there might be sales tax, there might be various kind of local lodging taxes, things like that. You can just add those all together as one item called room tax and itemize that out. For a lot of people, if they're not doing anything else at the hotel, that's the only two things you're gonna have to itemize are the actual rate of the room and the tax. So I'll just put in the actual amount of tax for that stay, and I can hit done, and we're done with that. You can see up here at the top, it'll show me how much I have left to itemize. If I didn't cover everything by splitting it all out, it would show me any remaining balance that I have to itemize here. Now we get a lot of questions about itemization, about things like different room rates on different nights. That's actually very easy to handle. So say you had one night at a weekday rate and one night at a weekend rate. What we suggest doing is, room rate is already in here, so you put in your room rate for however many nights at that room rate, and then you can just go down here and click add, and you can add another room rate item, and then you could put in whatever the rate is for that other night, or however many nights at a different rate. So it makes it very easy for you to do different room rates at different expenses. Obviously, if there's anything like room service or anything like that, you can choose that as an expense item as well. And we recommend if you get a nice itemized receipt from the hotel, just basically add all those items in just like the receipt says. So that is required for lodging, itemizing your lodging. Are there any questions about that? All right, we usually get a ton of questions at this point, but I guess I'm doing a good job. So I'm gonna just go ahead and remove this extra one. So this looks good to us. We'll hit done. And my lodging is now in there. I'll go ahead and just add a couple other things. I'll add my actual airfare. Again, I can, down here now, in the expense report, it's now requiring me to fill in these extra fields. During the spend authorization, it did not, but now I am required to actually fill in at least these two, the origination and destination. So let's just say we flew American, and we'll choose our origination. And actually, since I know the code, I can just do SWF. And Chicago, what do we say, Midway, okay. And you'll also see for each one of these items, there is an attachment area. Workday is not going to let you submit this expense report without an attachment for each one of these items. So there are a couple different ways you can handle your attachments. So an attachment can be anything from a receipt that you took a photo of with the Workday mobile app, to a paper receipt that you scan in once you get back from your trip. You can use your multifunction devices or scanners that you might have in your office. If you have an image runner, printer, fax, copier machine, that has a scanner built in, you can use that. You can do, we have a lot of questions about mileage. You can take a screenshot of Google Maps with the mileage of your route. You can take photos of your odometer before and after. You can use the trip counter in your car and take a photo of that. If you get an emailed receipt for an online transaction, you could just add a screenshot of that as well as attachments. So you have a lot of options for documenting your expenses, but we do need you to have documentation for each one of those expenses. And you can add them to each expense individually. So you'll see here for this particular airline, this airfare transaction, if I go down here, I can just drag and drop a file here, or just select a file from my computer. So I'll just grab a random one. We'll pretend this is a screenshot of my airfare receipt. Maybe I got it via email. And I can just check this box that says that there's a receipt included. So I guess we could add a couple more things to fill this out. So we had we still need to do meals, and then I guess the conference registration fee, we should just add that as well. So let's just do the registration fee really quickly. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll just keep adding my attachments here. And I'll choose receipt included. These all have receipts. Oh, the lodging needs one. Now there's another option I'll show you too in just a moment here for adding receipts, for adding any kind of documentation or file. And you also might find it easier, instead of itemizing every single receipt you have, you could just add them all together as one expense line. So for example, all your meals you could add up, as long as you just attached the receipts for all the individual meals. You could actually just add them all up and just add them as one item instead of individual items, if that's easier for you. That's an option for you. And you also have, as well as the attachment option for each individual expense, there's also an attachments tab here, which you can click in, and you can just kind of bulk add all of your receipts and all your documentation together. You just want to make sure you choose receipt included for each one of those expenses, so we know, oh, okay, we should look at all these receipts that you've added to this expense report and go through and find the expense that matches each one of these. So you do have a few different options there for adding attachments. So I'm going to go ahead. I think this looks good. I think we have, no, this one does not have an, okay, that does have an attachment. So I think if I submit this, it should go through. Nope, it's not happy. What is it not like? Oh, so again, I chose lodging, and it has required fields now under item details. So I actually do have to put my arrival and departure date. It will not let me submit this without filling these fields in. So again, anytime you see a red error in Workday, that means you cannot pass go, you cannot collect $200 until you actually solve those particular items. So we'll just go ahead and put in our arrival and departure dates. Again, I can choose, these are optional here. I can choose the hotel name, I can choose the destination and country. These are optional. I'm gonna not fill those, I'm not gonna bother filling those out. But I'll go ahead and hit submit now. Okay, it went through, and again, it goes to John for his approval. All right, any questions? Yes?
So if in the, when you created the spend authorization, if you did know exactly how much the hotel was and you put it in, you still have to re-enter it under the expense?
You do have to, yes. The question is, do you have to re-enter expenses if you know the exact expenses in the spend authorization? Yes, you do actually have to re-enter those, because the spend authorization for a lot of people might just be an estimate. It might not be exact. So as far as I know, there's no functionality to import those expenses. It would be nice, it would be great, but that's not how it works right now. I don't know if they're planning to change that, but that's how it works right now. You do have to just do those expenses over.
So 2 times?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are the spend authorizations required?
It's not. So again, spend authorization does depend on your department's policies. So I know there are departments that are definitely not using them. They travel all the time. They're used to just having people going and traveling and filing their expense reports. It's going to depend on each department's policies and procedures.
I think something to bear in mind is that the spend authorization will be most useful for travel that you anticipate weeks or months down the road. You know, if you're planning if you need to make a trip on short notice, a spend authorization wouldn't typically be expected. It's really meant to be kind of a planning and budgeting tool for departments and offices, so that you would actually even begin the process by talking to your supervisor or your cost center manager, as we would call them now, and say, talk about the travel you're planning to do. And once you've probably verbally agreed in many cases to your intent to travel, then you would go and submit the spend authorization. But again, it will depend upon what, you know, the chair of a department or the director of a department or office is going to decide to use the spend authorization for. But it's not going to be required for everyone. It's really going to be up to the individual departments and offices of the college.
Jeff?
I thought I remember hearing or reading something that if it's above a certain amount, requires authorization.
Oh, I think what you're talking about is a purchase. That would be distinguished from travel expense.
But not for travel, not above a certain
No.
amount.
Well, so yeah, so a purchase, the threshold is $1,000 purchase or more needs to be submitted as a requisition. This is completely separate. This is strictly on the basis of travel.
Yeah.
Can you track, the travel expenses to a specific employee over a year? In other words, can I look at someone on my staff and say, they spent $500 on travel this year?
So the question is, can you track the spending of a specific person? Candace, do you have insight into that?
I'm just going to come here on the microphone. I'm sure that being the information is going into Workday, I definitely believe that we can report off of it. We're just really learning and building the reports in Workday. So as of today, I don't know if you're going to be able to get the information that you need, but as we continue to learn Workday and really understand the reports that come from it, I would say absolutely we should be able to pull that out.
Yeah.
So if, kind of tagging along with one of the questions asked earlier, if you put in the information into the spend authorization and then get to the expense report option, there was an option there for creating from the spend authorization. You're saying that information won't pull in?
So it pulls in, so the question is, when you create a spend authorization and then create an expense report from that spend authorization, does it pull any data in? It does pull some data in, so it pulls into things like the business purpose, the cost center, stuff like that, but it doesn't pull the expenses in, at least not right now. I don't know if that's something that might change. Obviously that would make life a lot easier for a lot of people. But I thought that's how it worked too, but it doesn't work that way right now, so.
Like Chad said, the functionality isn't there in Workday yet, but Melissa, I know you know what this means, but there is a brainstorm out there in the Workday community saying this is something that companies are asking for that information to pull over from the spend authorization into the expense report. So hopefully in the future we will see that happening.
Yeah, Andy.
So travel expenses are just charged to a corporate card, like a purchase basically, and you don't need any reimbursement. Is there any need to go through the expense report process, or how is that differentiated, or is it differentiated from just a corporate card?
So the question is, how is just a corporate card purchase differentiated from what you might do in an expense report? And my understanding is the corporate card is pretty much primarily for travel.
Yes. Can I take this question?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
Okay, so yes, the answer is yes. You still have to submit an expense report even if you used your corporate card for your entire trip, because this is how you are going to reconcile or verify your corporate card expenses. They are no longer going into JP Morgan Net for you then to reconcile them. So what will happen is your expenses, would you sign into Vassar 7 for me,
Sure.
please?
Yeah.
What will happen is your corporate card transactions will feed right into Workday, and then you're going to select which transactions are connected to the travel for the expense report that you're submitting. And then once you do that, once you link your transaction to the expense report, that transaction has been reconciled. So yes, you still have to submit an expense report.
And just one other quick question.
Sure.
If you are the cost center manager, does the pick up to supervisor?
Correct. Not necessarily this. The question is, if you are the cost center manager and you're submitting an expense report, who does it go to next? So it is going to go to potentially the direct report to senior officer. It's going to go to the next person in the chain, and not necessarily supervisory chain. It's more the financial chain. So whomever oversees. Well, I guess it almost probably would be a supervisor at that point. It could be the same person. I'm going to sign in just to show you what the corporate card transactions look like when they do feed into Workday. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the expense report, or expense worklet, create expense report. And I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. And you can see that there are two tabs here. This mobile expenses, this is the tab that Chad had shown in his demonstration. The next one is the credit card transactions. So this is where you would see all of your credit card transactions from your corporate card. So I only have one here, and I'm just going to say, yes, include this transaction in my expense report. Click OK. And you can see that that information came, got pulled over into the expense report, the date of the transaction, the amount, the description. I'm still going to have to tell the system that this is for lodging or a hotel. And I want to just scroll to the top because up here, you can see that at this point the company paid $4,400 for this very expensive hotel stay. So you can see that the company already paid this amount. So the reimbursement to me is $0. Now if I did have an out-of-pocket expense, so let's say, I paid for a taxi ride, out of pocket, say $20. And I scroll up, company paid the $4,400. The amount reimbursable to me is $20 because that's an out-of-pocket expense. Yes.
Any chance that when you use your card, and it's imported into Workday, that it automatically itemizes everything for you on the hotel?
No. No.
Is that a future feature?
Okay, so when a transaction hits your credit card statement, it's one line. It's not going to be an itemized line. So the question was, an itemized, say, hotel charge is not going to get pulled into Workday already itemized. It's going to come through as the total amount, one line amount, and then you're going to have to itemize it from there. Yes. Yes, Melissa.
If you create expense items ahead of time and you're going to add them to an expense report at a later date, as you add them to the expense report, do they then get removed so they cannot be added to another expense report?
I would say yes. Go ahead.
They definitely. So the question is,
Thank you.
when you're creating expenses, like in the mobile app, for example, when you add them to an expense report, do they get removed so they can't be added to other expenses? Yes, because I've made a bunch of expenses for this training, and they disappear as soon as I've linked it. So yeah.
And that would definitely be the same for the credit card transactions. That I know for sure. Yes.
And so there was what type of reimbursement would you like on a previous screen? Right
Yes.
there. So reimbursement payment type, and it's red, so you have to enter that.
Mm-hmm.
But what if there's no reimbursement?
So. Sorry.
I think it requires you. It'll default to check, and if there is no reimbursement to you, then that option doesn't matter. However, it is a required field. Workday is looking for a response there, but it will default in as a check. So even if you're not going to get a reimbursement,
It'll look like you are, except you'll have to look above to
Yeah.
see what the reimbursement amount is, got it.
Correct.
No, it shouldn't give you an error message. Right, it shouldn't give you an error message because it requires you to put something there, right?
Right. If I don't put anything in the reimbursement payment type box, then it would create an error if I try to submit this expense report.
And
But
you
like-
have to put something in even though there's no reimbursement.
Correct. And like I said, when I first came to this screen, it populated in there already. So there's no extra step. So even if you're not entitled to a reimbursement, something will come in this field unless you literally, like you saw me do, click the X button to make it blank. But yes, this field does need to be entered just because it's a Workday required field. Yes.
How do you correct errors? Data, I entered the wrong information.
After you've submitted it?
Well, before you submit, and then after you submit.
So before you submit it,
Candace, can you just repeat the question?
the question is, how do you correct any data entry errors? So before it's submitted, you can go in and touch any of these fields. I'll go back into my lodging one. And being these were pulled in from my credit card transaction, I cannot alter the amount because the amount is what it is. This is the amount that was charged to the credit card company that fed into Workday. So I can't change this. However, I can change the expense item name. I can change any of the budget information, the arrival date, departure. So you can go ahead and just alter it
What
before
if I
it's.
drop the wrong file, upload the wrong file?
Oh, like if you, let's see, keep hitting continue.
I just know that I might have 15 screenshots on my desktop. And I
Okay.
might upload
Just scroll down to
second
like
one
the
to
attach.
So David, you're asking about like an attachment that you might have put in to correspond with an expense?
All right, so say
If you want to correct that, okay.
yeah, so say you just attached something here. It's not correct. You just hit the trash can, remove it, add whatever one is appropriate.
So it's all editable up until you click submit. What happens after you submit?
Yep, and then even after you click submit, you can go and view my expense reports, and there will be a big button there that says edit my expense report, or change. I think the word is change my expense report, and you hit change, and you can go ahead and make any changes that you need to make.
Before it's approved, I think is the key thing there.
That is true.
So you can go up to the upper left and type in my expense reports. You'll see a list. And if this were editable, I think, I'm trying to remember if you just have to, yeah, this one's been approved. I could show you on mine, but you would have I think there's just another button over here to just change that report or edit it, so. Yeah, Melissa.
Along that note, if the wrong budget is selected and submitted, I guess either on the spend authorization or the expense report, does the approver have to send it back, or can they change the costing on it?
The approver cannot make any changes to the document, and that's more of a control purpose thing. So they actually have to send it back with a note in the comments stating why they're sending it back. I'm sorry, the question was, if there's something wrong, does the approver have to send it back to the person that initiated the expense report, or can the approver make the change? And the answer is that the approver has to send it back in order for a change to be made. Jeff kindly reminded me to show you what happens in a case where you use your Vassar College corporate card on a personal expense by accident. So I'm just going to show you.
Or actually maybe a case where you don't have cash and that's the card you choose to use, but it's considered a personal expense rather than a reimbursable expense.
Oh, okay. Okay, so there's two different things here. So, hold on, let me stick with Okay, so you can see that there's another spot here for personal expenses. So let's say that this $4,400 charge, it's a little outlandish, was truly a personal expense. I charged my Vassar College corporate card by accident for something that I shouldn't have. There's this personal box here. I'm gonna click the box. And that's indicating that this charge should have been paid by me, not the college. So what will happen here, you'll see that $4,400 came in as a personal expense. However, the company paid $4,400 already, which now means that my reimbursement, because I'm owed $20 for my taxi cab, my reimbursement is actually a negative amount. I actually owe the college at this point. If my reimbursement amount was more than this amount, then it would just, that personal expense would just get deducted from the amount that Vassar College is reimbursing me for. Yes?
If you do end up having a negative reimbursement, how do you actually pay that?
Yeah, no problem. You would just write a check. The question is, if you do owe the college, how do you pay it back? You would just write a check and it would go to the cashier's office. It would get applied to the budget and whatnot. It happens today. It's no different than the way we handle it today.
Okay. I just never had that happen, so I was just curious.
Good.
So-
That's a good thing.
Yeah, right.
You're not supposed to have this happen.
A more common example of when you might owe the college money or have something in the negative is, let's say you're staying at a hotel and you decide to order a movie to watch in your room. You would have to, when you're itemizing your bill, you'd actually have to itemize that expense from your hotel bill, and you'd check off the box that would say personal, because that would be expense that wasn't really a natural expense that the college would expect you to incur on while you're traveling.
Yes, Melissa.
What happens if you don't? And it gets through approvals and goes all the way to, is that something the accounting's done on that and going to check?
So right now, the accounts payable will be reviewing the backup documentation, just like they do now, to make sure that the expenses are, legitimate for the college to pay for. And yes, so if there's a red flag or something doesn't add up, it could just get sent back with a note saying, this needs to be coded as personal.
So is that what the procedure will be? If it gets as far as accounting, somebody in accounting would send it back to
Yeah.
notify the individual that something needs to be changed. It won't just be changed and no notification back to the individual.
It's a good question. I would like to say that the individual should be making the change. So then that way they are aware
Aware, right?
of what they're not going to be reimbursed for.
Right.
Yes.
So it seems like there's nothing in this expense report process that would prevent like an administrative assistant from making travel reservations for some organization and then basically filing the expense report themselves. Is that correct?
So the only thing is,
Candace, can you repeat the question?
the question is regarding an administrative assistant booking the travel and then for an administrator and then filing an expense report. So I'm just going to talk it out and then make sure I answer your question. So the first thing to remember is that when the administrative assistant probably doesn't have a corporate card. The administrator usually does. So the travel would have to get booked on your card first.
In the case where the administrative assistant does. And
Okay.
So
Okay.
in the library, typically librarians don't have corporate cards.
Okay.
And there are 13 of them who book their travel for members. So that's the case for that.
So then what's going to happen is all of those transactions are going to come through on the person that's booking the travel. It's going to come in under their name,
Right.
which now when they submit an expense report, it's going to look like they're submitting an expense report for themselves
Right.
and not necessarily for the 13 administrators in whom they truly booked the travel for. So I don't know if that's how you would want to continue to handle it.
Well, I guess I'm trying to just figure
Yeah.
out what, if the system will require a change in practice, since that's the current practice. And then sometimes, of course, people come back from travel and say, you booked most of it, I had this unexpected expense out of pocket, so I need reimbursement for $50 for this or something. So I'm trying to figure out how that would reconcile
definitely can talk offline. My primary response is the individual who is traveling should be the one who's submitting their expense report and submitting a request for a reimbursement, submitting their own credit card transactions. And I say that because it's accountability. So let's take it offline, and we could talk further about what happens in your department, and we can kind of figure out what would work best.
Okay, should I email you then?
Sure.
Could you just make in the memo section a note for Jane Doe's travel, expenses for Jane Doe's travel to
Okay.
such and such conference in the memo section?
Yes, you could definitely use the memo field to specify who the travel is for. But I know somebody before had asked about running reports on how much travel an individual is doing. So if you have other people booking and submitting expense reports under somebody else's, for somebody else, then reporting is not going to be accurate. It's going to look like the AA is doing all the traveling, right? So you just have to be careful about that.
Yeah, it's hard though, people don't have corporate cards. And then they have to do everything out of their own pocket, which,
Or the administrator uses their corporate card to book the travel.
so the administrator looks like they did all the travel.
Isn't that who's traveling?
Is that, you mean the administrative assistant or the department administrator?
The department administrator has the corporate card, should be booking their travel and submitting the expense reimbursements, or as the expense reports.
But it's like he has librarians, I have sergeants
Yes.
who might travel.
Right. Yes, let's talk about the sergeants, because you're right, they might travel and they don't necessarily have corporate cards.
Right.
And they would, so the reimbursement would be, they would have to pay. Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
On the last page of the travel FAQ, there's a question on this topic.
Okay, what does it say?
It says, my manager assigned me as a delegate to complete their expense report in Workday. How do I use the system to submit their report?
Yes, so there is a delegation feature in Workday in which the administrator can delegate the task to the administrative assistant to submit an expense report on their behalf. Just the one thing I want to go back to is the credit card transaction shouldn't be booked on the AA's card. It should still be booked on the administrator's card, because if the AA goes in to submit an expense report on the administrator's behalf, those credit card transactions need to be linked to the administrator, not to the AA. So
another way to explain this is that when a delegation occurs, you're delegating access to your information to somebody else. So it's if I'm an AA and somebody has delegated to me the task of submitting the expense report, it's still going to be using Arlene's information. That's why it's important that the charge be against Arlene's account. If that helps clarify things at all.
So, yeah, that's kind of a little bit different
Right.
scenario than the 5
Sergeants.
sergeants and 13 librarians.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you have a corporate card, and as we say in our materials, if circumstances make it completely impossible for you to submit your own expense report, or if you decide as a office or department procedure that will be a delegation task, then you would use that function. But we do encourage delegation to be an exception rather than a rule in the certain tasks that are optional as delegatable, I guess.
I think what we need to follow up on is that, this is a fairly significant procedural change in departments that I don't think we were aware of prior to this training. So the people who are going to be affected by this hadn't signed up for this training, so they didn't think necessarily that their process would be complete. So we may need to dedicate some training to that group, or we are going to we can talk about that.
Okay.
I think the key is, you have a card, all your expenses need to be on that card, regardless of who processes your expense report.
True. Yes.
And if you don't have a card,
Right.
we
Most
talk
of the people
offline.
that do not have cards.
Right. And then the question might be, maybe they should have a card, right? Depending. So, yes.
What was it, can you say the question again, I'm sorry?
Yes. I'm an administrative assistant in the department with 13 professors. I'm new, some of them will be new. So is it up to my department chair who files the reports for the professors, or do they have to do it?
Goes back to the delegation question.
Yeah, I mean, it is an available option for a chair to delegate, for any professor to delegate the task. Anybody who holds a card can delegate the expense report to an administrative assistant. You know, I think the dean of the faculty's office is going to be communicating with all the faculty and all the academic administrative assistants about how the new functions of Workday will match with the approval process as well as the spending process for professional travel. So that, I think, is coming down the pike.
Yeah, and most of the faculty, almost in the faculty office, though, right? Their travel is usually funded by our office, and I believe our expectation going forward is that the faculty members would be submitting those requests for themselves. And yes, more communication will be going out about that. So that would route to us as opposed to the department.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, Melissa, you have a question?
Yes, costing split. So if there is a particular conference that is going to be funded by multiple funding sources, how is that handled? Is there a way to identify multiple sources?
Yes.
So the question is, can you split expenses to be covered by multiple, I guess, cost centers?
So, for the line item, if I just hit itemize, I can I can say, so up here it's telling me, okay, for $20, so I'm gonna say it's 50-50. So $10 is gonna get covered by accounting services, and I scroll down, and I can say the other $10, other 50% is gonna get covered under another department.
And you got there by hitting itemize on a particular expense item?
Correct. So you
And then
can't,
how does it route in that?
it'll go to both. So the expense report will go to both cost center managers. Yes, the whole expense report will route to both cost center managers. So it doesn't necessarily split the expense report out, rather the whole expense report will go to both cost center managers.
And the system would require approval from both cost centers. It's not just if one approves, it goes through.
Correct. And yes, approvals will have to be done by both cost center managers in order for the expense report to get finalized, approved, and reimbursed.
Thank you.
Yes. Good question. Are there any other questions? If not, we can go into the test site and check it out and play around a little bit. Do you want to pull up the URL?
Yep. So feel free to stick around if you want to play with this. And again, I think Jeff is just going to email you the URL too if you want that. And you can do this on your own time as well. So again, just a reminder, this is the test instance. Nothing you do in here is going to be reflected in the live Workday instance and vice versa.